Kerbal right here, and I am back with another Kerbal Space Program video, and my first video in a tutorial. And we are going to the Mun with a heavy lander. Now this will be a two-part tutorial on how to get to the moon, but of course it'll also give a brief demonstration on how to actually get into orbit, because let's face it, in this game that is probably the most daunting task for anyone new to Kerbal Space Program. But once you get into orbit, sky's the limit. You can go anywhere from there as long as your craft is set up appropriately. As you see here, I'm not building a typical lander stage. I'm using atomic rockets to save on fuel, because just in case I wanted to go to the moon and maybe go to Mimas or some other planetary body. But this is, I would say, my favorite choice in making a simple lander craft, instead of just putting, like a poodle engine on the bottom with landing legs. This way I have plenty of fuel to use. And this is me just launching up the rockets, just to see if I get any kind of lift off of uh, Kerbal's gravitational force. So with the lander not even budging, I go back to the vehicle assembly building and decide to add a third atomic engine to the craft, hopefully to get a little bit more lift. And right here you can probably see the craft kind of jostle around a little bit. So this, granted, I'm adding a little extra weight, but I'm still running on the efficiency side. So I can travel the solar system with this landing craft alone. It'll give me significant delta V. Once again, I don't know the mathematics behind it all, but I just know from trial and error and past experiences. And here we go. Gonna blow up. That was a failed attempt. So with a slight redesign, I actually added beams to go slightly above my capsule, so I can put my atomic engines a little higher. Because if I were to put my landing gears down, I actually bottom out the bottom of the engines, and then they break off. Also, you'll notice that I put a poodle engine on the bottom of my second stage. With a lot of launches that actually proved unsuccessful because I could not get enough delta V to get into orbit, and with orbital decay I would just fall back to the surface of Kerbal. So, not shown in the video, but I actually swapped that out for a bigger engine. Now with this setup, I'm actually going to be running asparagus staging, and for those of you who don't know what asparagus staging is, it basically, in a 4-tank asparagus staging such as this, it takes fuel from one tank and drains it into the other while it's burning. So when you jettison 2 tanks, all your other tanks will magically fill back up. Beginning my launch now. Now the trick is to get into orbit is, now this is kind of the rule of thumb between a lot of people that play Kerbal Space Program. You want to keep it under 200 meters per second until you reach 10,000 meters or 10 kilometers in the atmosphere, because otherwise you're just wasting fuel trying to push through the atmosphere. So keep it right under 200 meters per second, and you save fuel. Now you see I just jettisoned 2 tanks, and while I did that, the 3 remaining tanks that I have filled back up. And a nice shot of the Mun there, which we are soon to be going to. So 10,000 meters up, and I do my gravitational turn at 45 degrees. And you always want to make sure you don't have a jettison stage at your gravity turn, because you run a risk of blowing up your craft. And I end up getting into a weird roll here, but I'm able to stabilize it. I jettison the last 2 tanks, and my last main drive is full again. And this will be way more than enough to get me to a nice stable orbit around Kerbin. Rule of thumb, just remember, anything under 70 kilometers in the atmosphere, you begin to experience orbital decay, and your craft will plummet into Kerbin, and it will be a terrible wreck. So I always try to shoot for at least an 80-kilometer orbit, but a very stable orbit is at 125 kilometers because then you have your next step in time acceleration. So right now I'm just coasting to my apoapsis, which is the highest point of your orbit, and the periapse is the lowest point of your orbit. So keep that in mind. And on my orbit window on the left-hand side with MechJeb, it shows all the information I need to know. So rarely do I have to go back and forth between the map to see what my apoapsis actually is. I just like to double check. It's just a force of habit. MechJeb has unfortunately spoiled me since I've been using it. When I started playing Kerbal Space Program, I did everything manually, just like I'm sure most of you have who have played this before. So when I go to jettison my main drive stage, I get a very weird explosion. Um, I, I've never actually had this kind of explosion before, but here, check it out. Random, nothing else got destroyed on my second stage or my landing stage, so thankfully the mission to the Mun is still a go. So now what I'm going to do is create a new maneuver node at my apoapsis, and I'm going to extend my prograde vector to bring my periapse at the same height as my apoapsis to create a perfect circular orbit. And then I'm just going to move right to the blue target on my nav ball, and then when the time reaches about 2 seconds, that's when I will begin my burn until the delta V meter, the little yellow meter alongside the nav ball, has reached 0. Now when making your orbital insertion, you'll notice that there's a yellow bar on the right side of the nav ball. That is how much delta V you will need to get your orbit for the maneuver node that you set up. So once you completely deplete that bar, then theoretically you should be in a perfect stable orbit, but you'll notice that right when you get down to about 10 or 20 so delta V left, you'll notice that your blue target on your nav ball begins to kind of oscillate around. So you just want to decelerate and then move your craft to that target position again, and then slowly accelerate until your delta V is completely ran out. So the camera has changed, so I am now in a stable orbit. Decelerate. Then I'll rotate my craft just to finish out that delta V. It isn't too much, but for those of you that are picky, like me, they just slightly burn a little bit. And there we go. We are somewhat in a perfect circular orbit. And that was part 1 of this tutorial. Part 2, I'll show you how to make a lunar insertion and how to actually land on the moon and return home to Kerbin. This is probably, like I said, if you're new at Kerbal Space Program, this is definitely the most daunting thing to do, is to get into orbit. But like I said, once you're in orbit, from there, sky's the limit. You can go anywhere that you want as long as you got the appropriate ship set up. But on another day, until next time.